again, solution. So I'll now hand over to Monica Davidson, who'll be taking us through a fantastic and fast-paced presentation that's all about the business of freelance life, which she knows a lot about. So Monica is the doyenne and director of Creative Plus Business. She's an award-winning expert on the creative industries. She started her professional life as a freelance writer, performer and filmmaker. After launching her production company, began sharing her entrepreneurial learnings by mentoring and teaching other creatives, which is what we're doing now. In 2013, she consolidated her knowledge with a master's degree in screen arts and business from AFTRS, and shortly after was appointed as Australia's first creative industries business advisor. In 2016, Monica founded Creative Plus Business, a social enterprise that educates creative practitioners about business, money and marketing. She also continues her own work in screen, releasing her featured documentary Handbag on SBS in 2023. Surprisingly, not a documentary about handbags.
No, not at all, in fact.
So thank you so much, Monica, and I'll hand over to you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. And I would also like to join in acknowledgement of country. I'm on Gadigal land as well, and I want to pay my respects to the elders of this land and their ongoing custodianship of the place that we're at.
Monica, I might just let you know, if that's okay, you seem to have gone frozen.
No!
So potentially if you can. Oh no, you're back. Thank goodness for that. Okay.
Maybe I was just really still, although I doubt that very much. I will be here. I want to also encourage you to say hello to each other. So, you know, we've been introducing ourselves, and you can use the chat to say hello to each other if you would like to. Let me launch straight in, though, and go through what we're going to be discussing tonight. Hopefully there's no technical issues. I am the one person who can't leave and come back. So hopefully all is well. So in terms of trying to distill the business of creativity into a speedy less than 90 minutes, I've decided to focus on 5 steps that I think are really critical and in ensuring that you are ready for the business of creativity. And there are also 5 steps that I've seen a lot of people have missed or become very confused by in their process of, you know, becoming more professional. Now, I want to say a couple of quick things at this point before I go into the details. The first one is some of you might feel a little bit skittish about the word business, and I don't blame you. The word business can be a little bit frightening, but as you'll find out from the way we go through this, my point of view is that the more business-like we can be about the way we run our creative practice, the more likely we are to be able to get a handle on it. For example, things like having lots of different kinds of work coming your way, being hired in lots of different kinds of ways, having a diversity of things that you can do. All of that is much more suitable to the word business than pretty much anything else. And even if you're freelancing and that's why you're here, according to the ATO and some of the other rules and regulations that I'm going to go through, when you are freelance, you are also a business. So don't get too skittish about the word. Hopefully by the end of this session, you will feel a little bit more comfortable about it. The other thing I want to quickly mention is that I'm going to start with the absolute basics, the brass tacks of what's needed. And for some of you, that's going to be too basic, but I would urge you to hang in there. I like to go right back to basics and start at the very beginning with some of these things for a couple of reasons, mostly because I don't want anyone to get left behind. And so if you are joining us this evening and you do know pretty much nothing, then I'd like you to get those first basic pointers. But the other reason I do it is because there's quite a lot of mythology that gets shared in our industry about what you should and shouldn't do. And so by going back to basics, it gives you an opportunity to check your own knowledge. If you're just that little bit more experienced and you can think to yourself, yes, I'm doing that. Oh, no, I haven't quite done that. So just hang in there. So we're going to talk about how to set yourself up properly, and including all of the registrations that you need to go through, including your ABN. We're going to talk about how to make and spend the money using best practice and the technology that's available to you. We are going to talk about the boring but necessary world of insurance, and I'm going to give you some essentially some jargon on how to navigate that world. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on making the deal legal and using MOUs or memorandum of understanding to and agreements to protect you. And then I'm going to talk about preparing for marketing. Now, honestly, I could do a deep dive into all of these and be talking at you for over an hour. We are going to take a speedy tour of these things, which is why I've created a huge amount of resources for you. And those resources are all being held in this Dropbox. Now, this is a permanent digital folder full of information. You can access this folder for as long as you like. I have the chat, I have the link on screen, which I believe is also going to be shared with you, plus a QR code if you want to scan that. Everything is in there, and so are all of the web links that I'm going to share and any specific downloads that I mentioned, all in one place. So that should make things a little bit easier for you. The only other resource that I'm going to share at this point, and there'll be more, is business.gov.au. Now, this isn't set up specifically for creative professionals, but it is a one-stop shop for basic small business information in Australia. And I urge you to go and have a look at it, even though it's dull. Let's not beat around the bush. It is dull, but it is really important. It's free, it's reliable, it's regularly checked, it's available in multiple languages, and it is a really, really fantastic resource just to get those basics sorted out. So business.gov.au, you can tell that it's a government website from the .gov.au suffix there on the web link. Okay, let's get started. Here's my first tip. My first tip is to set up your freelance business, or how to be responsible. Now, there are 4 components to this that I want to go through. And as Beck mentioned, there's also going to be an opportunity to ask me questions at the end of this section. So what I want to talk about are the numbers that you'll need to have at your disposal, your tax file number and your Australian business number. I also want to talk a little bit about business structures and how to register a business name. Now, there are 2 numbers that you need to know, and I'm specifically focusing on the numbers for reasons that will become clear in a moment. Those 2 numbers, as mentioned, are your tax file number and your Australian business number. These numbers will dictate how you get hired. And if you know which number you're using when you get hired to do work, it will help you have a better understanding of what your rights and responsibilities are in that professional relationship. Now, I'm asking you to focus on the numbers because some of the language that gets used around these relationships can be really tricky. Traditionally, when you get hired with a tax file number, you will be referred to as an employee. You might be full-time, part-time or casual, but you will be an employee, and there are very specific rights and responsibilities that come with that. So again, depending on the nature of the way in which you've been hired, but you will be entitled to be covered by workers' compensation insurance, for example, and you will be automatically entitled to superannuation, for example. But here's the problem. Lots of people who get hired through their tax file number are often referred to as contractors because they're on a short-term contract. And that's very specific to us in the creative industries. If you're an actor, for example, or a model or a presenter, you might get hired on a 4-hour call as an employee. Now, 4 hours doesn't even really make you a casual. You will probably be referred to as a contractor in those circumstances. But if you're using your tax file number, you are an employee, even if it's only for a morning or a week or a really short-term period. The reason that that's such an important thing is because when you're hired under your Australian business number, you will also get called lots of different things, including freelance or sole trader or contractor. So being referred to as a contractor is really unhelpful. And I've spoken to dozens and dozens of creative people who've been really confused about what their rights and responsibilities are in their working situation because they don't know what they are. If you don't know what you are, go back to the numbers. If you've used your tax file number, you're an employee, and all the rights and responsibilities of that world stand. And if you've been hired under your ABN, then you've been hired as a business. And there, all of the different rights and responsibilities stand for that. You'll also know that you've been hired as an employee if you filled out one of these. And I'm sorry if that was triggering for you. I probably should have given you a little bit of a warning that that was about to pop up, but I'm sure you've seen it before. What I want to focus on is your ABN, your Australian Business Number. Now, this is a 13-digit identifier, very similar to your tax file number, that helps the government and potential clients, customers, and employers identify you as an independent business as opposed to being an employee. One of the most frequent questions that I get is, why do I need one? Well, you'll need one for legal and taxation reasons once you get a little bit further along the path. But I talk to a lot of emerging creatives who think that they need to develop a level of professionalism before they get an ABN. That's a little bit like thinking that you should have a couple of part-time jobs before you get a tax file number. Getting an ABN is actually the first step. If you want to be hired legally, treated fairly, and engaged professionally in any kind of situation that isn't as an employee, you will need an Australian business number. There's another reason why you need one as well, and that is because it makes you easier to hire. The horrible reality is that if I'm faced with two enthusiastic emerging creatives and, you know, you're both of equal talent and equal capability, and one of you has an ABN and one of you doesn't, I'm going to hire the person with the ABN because it makes my life easier. There's a lot of hoops that I have to jump through if I want to engage someone who doesn't have an ABN. And frankly, I don't want to jump through those hoops because I'm lazy. I don't want to. I want it to be easy. Make it easy for people to hire you by getting an ABN. One of the myths that people often share is that getting an ABN immediately exposes you to a whole lot of complications with organisations like the Australian Taxation Office. Certainly things are going to get a little bit more complicated for you, but it's a slow and gradual process. You will have time to learn as you go what all of these things mean. If you've been holding back on getting an ABN because you've been a little bit uncertain about it, then obviously do a bit more research. But this is the place to go to register your ABN. One of the key things that you need to remember about getting an ABN is that it's free. It always has been free and it always will be. So if you've paid to get an ABN, then unfortunately you've paid to do something that is relatively easy to do by yourself. But make sure you go here to register.business.gov.au. When you Google how to get an ABN, you will be presented with a lot of websites that will ask you for a fee in order to go through this process. Avoid. Go straight to the source. This is the place to go to register your ABN directly with the government. You'll need a little bit of information on hand to be able to make all of that happen. You can assemble this beforehand, and there's loads and loads of resources on this website to help you navigate this process. But you'll need your own name and contact details. You'll need details of your business activity, which I'll get to in a moment. You'll probably need your tax file number, some sort of proof of identity, and you'll need to know what your business structure is going to be, which I'll talk about more in a moment. You'll need to have the details of your business activity, but again, a lot of emerging creatives panic when they get to this point. They worry that whatever they're going to write down as their business activity is going to lock them in forever. If I commit to getting an ABN as a graphic designer today, do I have to stay a graphic designer forever? The answer is no. The reason that you will be asked this question is, one, to ensure that you are eligible for an ABN, which I imagine that you will be, and two, it's for data gathering purposes. The best way for the federal government to be able to track all of the different kinds of new businesses that are starting in Australia, the different themes and trends of what's going on, is to ask people this question when they get an ABN. So don't worry too much that whatever you write down, you'll be held to until the day you die. You can change and move around and adapt your creative life as much as you need to. Certainly I have. That's just a little warning. I will talk about business structures in a moment, but before I do, I just want to mention this website for those of you who already have an ABN. Now, again, I've talked to lots of people who aren't sure whether or not they've got an ABN. They can't remember what it is. or they're not sure whether or not it's current. So this is the place to go to find out, the Australian Business Register. This is also a government website, and they have something called the ABN lookup. This is a free public view of all of the information that's available about ABN. You can type your name in here, or a business name, or your ABN if you can remember it, and it will tell you whether or not your ABN is still current. ABNs get cancelled, and they get cancelled for a few reasons, but the most common reason is because you're not using your ABN. Now, let's be really clear about what that means. When the government says you're not using your ABN, they mean that you haven't submitted an annual income tax return using that number. And that is incredibly common. If you've been studying or traveling, or if you've had a child, or if you've been unwell, or for whatever reason it might have been, there could have been a period of time, sometimes years, when you haven't actually used your ABN. And if that's the case, then your ABN can get cancelled. But it is easy to revive. It is free and relatively simple. You just need to go to this website, and in the top menu there, you can see it says tools and resources. The information that you need to revive your ABN will be there. Because actually, speaking of language, your ABN hasn't been cancelled. It's just been sleeping. Suspended or paused would be a better term, but whatever, I didn't write the rules. So what you will find is your cancelled ABN will just be given back to you, and you can keep using it. This is the place to go for that information. Now, I'm sure there's questions already. I'm almost at the question bit, so keep asking your questions, and I'm sure Beck and the Trusty Create team will tell me what the pressing questions are. Before I get into that, I just want to have a little bit of a chat about business structures. Now, all businesses have a structure, whether you're aware of it or not. When you get your ABN, you'll be asked to identify what business structure you will be choosing for this new entity that you've created, this new legal entity that you're making your own business. Now, on screen, you'll see what some of the main ones are: being a sole trader, being in a partnership, being in a company, being part of a not-for-profit, a social enterprise, or a trust. There are others. So even within the not-for-profit section, there are 4 other types of entities or organisations that you can be in there. Most people, if they're not sure of what to pick, will pick sole trader, which probably is correct. But it is important for you to know what your structure is, because again, much like having an ABN or a tax file number, the structure that you choose also dictates what your rights and responsibilities are as a business owner. And it's important to be precise about the language. One of my problematic areas around this is the word company. Now, in the arts, we tend to use the word company in, frankly, a pretty loose way. We will tell people that we have a theatre company or a dance company or a film company. When we use the word company, we mean a thrilling collection of human beings all working towards the same creative endeavour. But sadly, that's not the proper meaning of the word company when it comes to legal structures. And defining yourself as a company, if I go back to the last slide, you'll see the 3rd section there. That's a very precise term for a very specific type of structure. If you're a sole trader and you're telling people you're a company, they're going to get the wrong idea. When you tell me you're a company, I immediately make a whole lot of assumptions about your legal and financial rights and responsibilities. If you tell me you're a sole trader, I make a whole set of other assumptions. So even though it might seem like I'm being really pedantic here, the precision of your language is important. The majority of people that we work with in the creative industries, it's particularly at the early stages, are sole traders. So it is, very likely that that's what you are, but there are other structures available to you as well. So when you go into the drop box, you will find this resource. We've created an information sheet that goes through most of the main types of structures and gives a little bit more information about what they all involve. So you can work out for yourself what you are and how that's going to work. If you're thinking of being in a partnership, we have an additional resource for you as well. Being in a partnership means that you'll be joining together in the key decision-making parts of your business with more than just you. So a legal partnership can contain from 2 to 20 people. Can I just gently suggest that you not have a partnership of 20 people, by the way, because that way madness lies. But if you are entering into a partnership, then we've got an additional resource in the Dropbox for you. This comes from our friends at the Arts Law Centre of Australia, and I'll be talking about them a little bit more as we go through. They have this wonderful business partnership checklist that you can download from the Dropbox and go through. It is also really important here to mention the fact that what we're talking about here is the running of your business. We're not talking about working on projects. Think of it this way. Everything that I'm talking to you about today is about, navigating the structure or the support for those projects. So rather than I'm not talking about the projects themselves, I'm talking about what happens behind and between and underneath those projects. One of my favorite analogies is, I'm not here to help you learn how to make better coffee. I'm here to help you learn how to run the cafe. When it comes to being in a partnership, I'm not talking about you working with other people on specific projects. I'm talking about you owning your business with other people having some degree of responsibility over your cafe, just to stretch my analogy a little bit further. One of the key elements of that, as you can see on the screen here, are these 2 key questions that need to be decided by the group. How are you going to deal with other parties, and how are you going to deal with each other? Now, this is a 6-page document that asks some pretty pointed questions about how you're intending to run your business, and I highly, highly recommend it if you are thinking about sharing that responsibility with other people. Now, this is our first opportunity to ask questions. Have there been any questions that need my attention?
Yes, there have. So Monica,
Lots.
L. Wilkin has a 2-part question.
Okay.
They ask, I run a creative collective. Should the collective itself have an ABN, or should we use our individual ABNs? We want to get grants and funding, etc.
Okay.
That's the first part.
That's an excellent question. A collective is not a legally recognised entity in Australia. There are legally recognised entities that you might be more suitable for. So you could be a cooperative structure where you have a membership model, or you might be one of the other kind of not-for-profit models. So I think the important thing there is to try and figure out what you are by going through some of those structures. If you are in a cooperative or in one of those other legally recognised not-for-profit entities, then yes, you will need to get an ABN. But while you're figuring out what you are, it is perfectly okay just to use an individual's ABN. My very strong recommendation, however, is that you have some kind of written agreement, even if it's just very casual, about how everybody is going to work together in that situation. You're not actually in a legal partnership, but you should still have a look at that partnership checklist. Because if I was in a collective with 10 people, but we were all using my ABN, then I hold all of the legal and financial responsibility for what's going on. And if the rest of the collective leave me in the lurch, that's going to be really problematic. I'm sure you're all delightful. It's just my job to be a little bit nervous and cautious in these situations. So that would be my recommendation.
That's a great answer. And I think we do have some funding people on the team. So I think it's on the team's call tonight. But my understanding is for Create New South Wales applications for individuals and groups, a single individual may represent the group with that ABN.
Yeah.
And the second part of Elle's question is, what are the tax implications of choosing different ways to operate with an ABN?
It's a really good question that I probably can't answer now. I wouldn't suggest that you choose your structure based on the tax implications. I'd suggest you choose the structure because it most accurately reflects the reality of what you're doing. So, for example, if you're currently working on your own and you're taking sole financial and legal responsibility for everything, then start off as a sole trader and then learn the ropes. If it becomes necessary for you to become a company, for example, at a later stage, then there, in the resources that we've given you, there's some excellent materials in there on how to recognize when it's time. I wish I could answer that question in more depth, but it would take me a long time. I have a fantastic tax resource that I'm going to share with you in a little bit, though, so some of my answers will be in there. But it's a great question, and I'm sorry I don't have time to answer it. Oh, can't hear you, Beck.
Sorry, that's all the questions for now.
Oh, amazing. Love that. All right. Well, let's talk about what you're going to call this wonderful business of yours. Now, again, if you're a sole trader or if you're in a collective experience or you're just starting out, what most people tend to do is use their own name to describe their business, which is perfectly legal. And particularly in the creative industries, of all of the industries, we are the most likely to use our own name because what we do is so heavily tied to our own personal brand as well. So whether you're a sole trader or not, most people do start off by using their own name and that becomes their identifier. So Joe Blow here on screen can use his own name as Joe Blow, and he doesn't need to go through any kind of registration process to do that. He does need to get an ABN if he wants to work professionally, but he will get that ABN as a sole trader and he'll be using his own name. It's called trading under your own name or trading as your own name. Now, it needs to be your legal name. So that's the name that you use on your driver's license or your passport or on your name change certification if you've gone through that process. It is okay to use a nickname, but it needs to be what's called a reasonable diminutive. So Joe here is using the nickname Joe to describe himself, and that's perfectly fine. His full name is probably Joseph, but it's a reasonable diminutive, so it's okay. Now, here's the thing, though. So Joe can call himself Joe Blow. He can trade as Joe Blow. His website can be called Joe Blow, and all of his marketing materials and his accounts and everything can be in his own name, and that's fine. All he needs to do is get an ABN, and he's doing everything legal. But what happens if he decides to add something to his own name? Or what happens if he decides to trade under a name that is completely different from his own? If that's the case, then he's going to have to register in order to do that. And that is a more complicated process. Now, you'd need to register any kind of business name that is different from your own name. And it's a legal requirement that you do that for a couple of reasons. The most important one, though, is that all business names in Australia, all trading names in Australia must be unique. Now, there's no legislation around using your own name, of course, so not all individuals' names need to be unique. That would be impossible. But in terms of business names that are used for professional purposes, they all need to be unique from each other so that customers can recognise the difference. And in order to make sure that those names are all unique from each other, we have to go through this registration process. Now, the registration process is a kind of a two-step process. You can just go straight to registration, which I'll share with you in a moment. But what I would suggest is that you go to this website, which is the ASIC Connect website, to see whether or not the name that you want is available. This would be my recommendation to Joe Blow straight away. If he wants to register Joe Blow Designs, he should go here and search to see whether or not that name has already been registered. If it has been, he can't have it. He will have to choose something else. And this is a really important first step. Before you get that website, before you buy the domain, before you get that Instagram handle, make sure that you're allowed to use the name that you've chosen because it is unique. And I'm not kidding. If you are using social media for professional purposes, if you're using these marketing tactics as a way of creating of promoting yourself, then you are using them for business purposes. And if you're using a name that belongs to someone else, you can get into a huge amount of trouble. It is really important to make sure that whatever name you've picked, that it's available to you for all marketing and branding purposes. When you're ready to register, you can just go straight here again. This is the same place that you went to get your ABN in the first place. That's still the first step. If you then decide that you want to use a name that is different from your own, you come back to the government's business registration process and you have to fill out forms, a couple of extra forms to allow you to register. Now, the good news is that once you have registered the name, it's yours and no one else is allowed to use it for the purposes of business. It's a reasonably straightforward process. The bad news is that unlike your ABN, it's not free. Registering a business name costs $44 for 1 year's worth of registration and $102 for 3 years registration. Now, of course, you know, that's more expensive than free, but it is also a relatively small amount of money to pay to ensure that that business name belongs to you and you can use it in whatever way you see fit. The process itself is relatively straightforward, and again, you can go to these websites to get more information, but there's very often questions at this early stage, so I'll just want to stop here and see if anybody needs more questions about registering and setting up the business in general.
Yes, there is a question from Nimalka, who is asking a question related to what you were just talking about in terms of registering a name. They ask, if I run an online store or YouTube channel with a brand name, should we register the business name even though they're a sole trader?
Yes. My recommendation would be yes. The reason being that that's the only way to guarantee for sure that you have the right and the ability to use that name for business purposes here in Australia. It doesn't provide you with any kind of extensive legal protection. It's not the same thing as registering a trademark, for example, and it doesn't provide you with any kind of international protection. But I have just worked with too many creatives who have come up with a genius name for their brand or their business and have been using it freely, only to find out that someone else has registered it already, which means that they are violating, you know, that business's rights. Or in a couple of unfortunate cases, I've had people who've gone and registered the name specifically to kind of undermine that creative, which is very nasty and unfortunate. I just feel like for $44 a year, you're exposing yourself to way too much risk by not registering, particularly if you're already trading. It's a fairly easy step to go through just to really seal that whole package up.
Thank you, Monica. There is another question that is more related to superannuation, but it is related to super. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'll hold that one.
Hold that one. I've got a little bit of super chat that I'm going to talk about, just a little bit, but yeah. Right. All right, beautiful. I'm sure there will be other questions about sort of starting up and navigating those early stages. I realise I've just covered this very briefly, but at least that gives you a little tiny bit of information on how to at least get the foundational aspects of your business right. And again, the reason, right, like I said from the beginning, none of these are particularly exciting, but these are the places where I see creatives stumble all the time. And, you know, the way I like to think of it is you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's just part of the learning process. And frankly, it's kind of part of the fun. And it's annoying, but it's part of just, you know, figuring all of this stuff out. There's lots of mistakes you're going to have to make in order to progress your career. I'm talking about all the mistakes you don't have to make. You don't have to make any of these mistakes. You can just get all of this stuff sorted out, and then you can go and, you know, make all the fun mistakes, all the creative mistakes and the professional mistakes. These are simple places that I've found creatives tend to fall over because they've just never been told, which is why we're taking it down to basics. Now, hopefully, if you are going to be working professionally in your practice, then some sort of financial reward will come towards you, and you will need to learn how to navigate your finances, which is why my second tip is about getting ready to manage the money, or particularly how to prepare for the famine and the feast. Now, I've got a little bit to say about this, but there's also a lot more information on our website and on our webinar channel about all the different aspects of your finances, some of which I'm going to do a deep dive into in a moment. I think that living with an irregular income is the hardest challenge of having a professional creative career. And it isn't just really about business either. I think increasingly it has always been the way, really, over the many, many decades of my own creative career. It's always been this way. But increasingly what I'm finding is that more and more creatives are having this kind of portfolio career where we spend some time being employed and we spend sometimes being freelance, and then sometimes we're making our own work and we don't even know what we are. And then we've also got this collective over here, and who knows. For many of us, that's part of the thrill of this kind of work, but it does mean that we live in a less regular world than those who have a job, which is another reason why I urge you to consider yourselves to be businesses, even if you find that word unpleasant, because having multiple sources of income and having lots of different kinds of things that you can do, different products and services that you can sell, and engaging with the customers and clients in lots of different ways, that's business. Getting all of your money from a single source, that's employment. And so thinking about yourself in that more entrepreneurial way can sometimes be helpful, particularly because it also helps you to distinguish yourself from your friends and your family who might have a single source of income. Having irregularity of income and having multiple sources of income is the hardest challenge that you'll encounter financially. It is, you have invited financial chaos into your life. When you decide to make a professional creative career, you're also making the decision to introduce creative chaos and financial chaos into your life. And what that means is really this is going to be easier for you if you try and embrace some degree of financial management. Now, I'm not talking about you becoming financial experts, not at all. But if you have a fairly chaotic way of managing your money and you have also made the decision to enter into financial chaos, then there's just a whole lot of stuff in here that's going to go awry. It may not be your natural way. It may not be the way that your brain works, but I'm going to encourage you to adapt a couple of simple ways of managing your finances so that this world becomes less stressful for you. That's my primary concern. But the reason why I wanted to mention this is because I also want you to be very clear about the fact that the irregularity of your income is normal. It's perfectly normal. It's not normal for people with jobs, but it is normal for us. And I say that because a lot of the time we can feel very isolated with our financial chaos. There's nothing wrong with you. You haven't done anything wrong. You just entered into a specific part of our industry that makes this a little bit more chaotic. So that's the first thing I want to say. Now, the next thing, just a couple of tips about how to navigate this famine and feast, which is what I like to call it. And again, this is where we have a strong correlation to other kinds of businesses as well. All businesses experience periods of famine and periods of feast. Times when we're really busy and we've got money coming in and everything's great, and times when things are a bit dry and there's no project on the horizon and, oh no, what are we going to do? That, again, is also normal. And interestingly, if there's anyone joining us from sort of agricultural communities, the tax office does put us into a similar category to farmers, because we have a similar situation here in the creative industries. We have an irregular income. Some of us can make the entirety of our annual income like in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We are buffeted by external forces beyond our control, and we very often have seasonal work, periods of time when we're more likely to be busy or quiet, depending on what's happening in our industry. I don't know if that's helpful. It probably isn't, but I felt comforted when I found that out, so I'm sharing it with all of you. If we are going to acknowledge the fact that the famine and the feast is real, then one of my first tips is to have an emergency fund, an amount of money set aside specifically to help you deal with any problematic circumstances that may arise. Now, how much you put into that emergency fund is up to you. But I would suggest that it's enough money to give you some breathing space should an emergency arrive, even if that's just a week's worth of rent or a couple of trips to Woolies, so that should something tricky happen to you, you don't have to panic too much. I've had an emergency fund for almost 40 years, and I think it's made a huge difference to my levels of anxiety when it comes to my financial situation. Have that money set aside somewhere in a bank account where you can't access it, with a card or by tapping or any of those things. Otherwise, you'll just spend it. But it needs to be in a place where you can get at it easily. So it shouldn't be, locked away in shares, for example, or in, some other kind of locked up bank account. It needs to be liquid. In other words, if you have an emergency, you need to be able to get your hands on it, obviously. That then brings me to the next point, my next recommendation, which is to have a separate business bank account. Now, you don't have to have a separate account if you're a sole trader. Legally and financially, then you can merge all your money together and it doesn't really make a difference. But from a record keeping perspective and from a managing the chaos point of view, having separate bank accounts can be really helpful, even if you just have them all linked to your one personal account. My usual recommendation is that you think about the numbers again. So any money that you make through your tax file number can just go through into your ordinary personal account. But any money that you make through your ABN can go into a separate business bank account. Once you've got them separated, you can then start thinking about where your different types of money are coming from, and you can start paying for things from those separate accounts. You can start paying for your personal expenses like your groceries or clothing from your personal account, and you can start spending money from your business account for the things that your business might need. Once you get into the habit, even at an early stage, of separating the different kinds of money into their different categories, record keeping and preparing for things like your tax responsibilities is going to get much, much easier. So again, my recommendation is don't wait. Do this as early as you can. The earlier you get organised, the better. Again, I work with a lot of creatives who wait until they're making a certain amount of money before they get organised. Don't wait. Do it now. I started getting financially more organised when I was poor, and it was fantastic because I was only working with really small amounts of money. The more organised I got with the small amounts of money, once the money got bigger, then the organisational structures were already there and it wasn't quite as terrifying. What this all means, though, is that you're going to need to understand your budgets. You're going to need to understand how much it costs you to be alive and to do your work. I have a problem with the word budget, and I know it can be a problematic word for people, but I'm using it in the most literal sense. I'm talking about how much money you actually spend on doing the work, running your business, and managing your personal life. There are an array of budgets in the Dropbox for you already that you can download as spreadsheets if you want to work this out, or even just doing a back of the envelope calculation can make a huge difference. Ignoring your money is tempting, and I get it. It can be a terrifying prospect, particularly if you haven't been taught how to navigate your finances, but please do start thinking about it. There's no objective reason to ignore your finances. When we're ignoring our finances, it's because we're having a very emotional response to it. And again, that's totally fair. If you've never been taught how to manage your money before, or if you've been taught how to manage your money based on the assumption that you're going to have a regular income, and now you don't have one, I can totally understand and empathise with how scary this is. Trust me, I have been there. But learning how to do this, even if it's slow and painful, is going to make a huge difference. And this can be one of the places where you start. How much does it cost you to live your life and run your business and do the work? And that can make a really big difference to helping you get organised. I'd also suggest that you prepare to take money from people. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you can do this depending on the kind of work that you're going to be doing. And again, I run into lots of creatives who get themselves stuck because they haven't prepared early enough to take money from people. What I'm urging you to do here is prepare for success. Prepare for the possibility that someone will pay you, and it's good to get organised nice and early. If you are going to be providing people with a service, then the chances are you will be invoicing them for that service. Now, there are examples of invoices in the Dropbox already, but you can also go back to business.gov.au and have a look at their finance pages. They have a fantastic resource about how to invoice that has all of the information that you need. An invoice is a request for payment, so it does need to contain certain information in order to make it a legal document. For example, it needs to have the date of issue, it needs to have the date of when the money is due, it needs to have all your details on it, it needs to have the client's details on it, and it needs to have a description of what it is that you're actually invoicing for. We're not going to be talking tonight about the goods and services tax, the GST, but if you are ready to be registered for that tax, then that needs to be included as well. You might also need to include your super on here as well, and I'll talk more about super in a moment. So that can be quite a convoluted process. It can be pretty complicated. I urge you to go to this website and have a look at it, and there are also templates that you can download. If you're going to be taking money from people in person, either in a market stall or at events or something like that, then you might want to use some kind of point of sale device. Now, there are lots of different kinds of point of sale devices out there. I've simply mentioned Square here because it's the one that most of our clients use, most of our creative participants use, and it's also really easy. Oh, wait, hang on one second. My mum is an artist and she runs a market stall, and she is, and I say this with all the affection I can muster, an aging hippie, and she has figured out how to make her Square reader work. So I feel like that's, going to be a little bit easier for all of us. But there are lots of other points of sale devices out there. You don't have to use this one. It was just a way of recommending something. If you're going to be selling to people directly from your website or from some other kind of online portal, then you'll also need to set up a safe e-commerce facility. Now, again, there are lots of different kinds of e-commerce facilities that you can use. I've simply mentioned Shopify here because it's the most popular one in Australia and because it's relatively easy to use and set up. The main thing that I'm getting across here with these three different methods is that they need to be safe. People need to feel safe in order to give you their money, and I'm sure you can empathise with that. So, although sometimes people have some pretty, different ways of taking money from people, if you are going to take this seriously and prepare yourself for success, then you may need to investigate one or all of these methods just to make sure that the money is changing hands safely and legally and everybody is protected in that situation. I am going to open up for questions in just a moment. I've just got a couple more things to add. I would also recommend that you get organised early. As I said before, there isn't any good time to get organised. There's nothing wrong with tomorrow to get that ball rolling, even if getting organised means taking the necessary time to actually learn about all this stuff, which I'll talk about in a moment. This might also be a good time for you to contemplate using some sort of cloud or online accounting system. There are loads of fantastic cloud or online financial systems or apps that you can use. And on screen, I just have a selection of some of them, which I will read out for anybody who might be vision impaired. We've got MyOb, Xero, Square, NetSuite, Odoo, Cashew, Wave, FreshBooks, Sage, QuickBooks, and Rounded, just to name a few. Now, they all have different properties, they all do different things, they all cost different amounts of money. I would recommend that you check out the ones that you think are going to be the most suitable for you. The one that I would suggest you start with if you're a sole trader is Rounded. Now, I want to make it very clear, we get no financial reward from mentioning Rounded specifically here. In my opinion, they are the best online accounting system available for Australian sole traders because they were specifically set up with that in mind. And they also have a lot of resources available for people who are creative as well. It's a very easy system to use. It's a very safe system to use. And compared to some of the ones that I've just mentioned, particularly Xero and MYOB, it is also much, much more affordable. So do go and check out Rounded if you're thinking about investigating cloud accounting as a way of helping you. The beautiful thing about any of the cloud accounting methods that I've mentioned, though, is that you will be able to issue invoices and set up budget and, you know, track your time, hopefully, and do most of the things that I've recommended all in one place, which is ideal. There is, however, no replacement for time. Regardless of which exciting app you choose, my recommendation is to dedicate at least one day a month to navigating your financial life. And in a very uninspiring, non-creative way, I have named that Money Day, because I'm really bad at naming things. Money Day is quite literally that. One day, once a month, spent exclusively on managing your finances or learning how to manage your finances. We did a webinar about this topic a little while ago, and the link to watch the recording of that is in the Dropbox if you want more information about my recommendations of what to do on that magical day. There are also two big hairy topics that I'm sure people have questions about, and so in answer to those questions, I want to recommend two more webinars. So as part of our social enterprise outreach at Creative Plus Business, we do free webinars every month. Every May, we do our Super for Creatives webinar. So the one that we did last May is already on our website, and you can go and check it out and watch that anytime you like. If you have superannuation questions as a creative, whether those are questions about whether or not you should get paid super or whether or not you should be paying other people, I highly recommend that you go and check out our free webinar about it. It goes into lots of detail and information about how the whole system works. Although having said that, I know there's a question and I will answer it once I pause for breath in a moment. The other big hairy topic that everybody always wants to ask me questions about is tax. Every May, we do a free webinar about super, and every June, we do a free webinar about tax. We will do another one this year. So if you want to watch last year's recording about how tax works for creatives, you can go and have a look at our webinar. They're both free and they're both hosted by me. And I think they both involve diagrams, although no interpretive dance, but a lot of pictures because I'm trying to keep it, you know, light and friendly. Beck, any questions?
Yes, we have questions. So I'll go back to the super one since that was asked early on. Kyle asks, I was wondering if you could please talk about superannuation as a sole trader when being engaged for a project by an entity. If a fee is offered for a project or gig and I'm invoicing as a sole trader, what are the superannuation payment responsibilities of the entity engaging and paying me?
To answer that question really broadly, I'm always nervous about answering questions about individuals' specific situations because I always feel like if someone's offering you financial advice and they haven't actually had a look at your finances, then that should be best avoided. But I will tell you, just to paint with very broad strokes, if you are engaged in the creative industries, if specifically, and if you are engaged for your labour primarily, then you are entitled to what's called the superannuation guarantee for contractors, which is specifically and only for sole traders. But what that means is that as a sole trader being engaged to deliver a service in the creative industries, you should get paid super at the same rate as an employee, which I believe is 11.5% at the moment. And that money should be paid separately to, like, not paid to you, but paid into a separate superannuation fund of your choosing. Because one of the really dodgy things that happen is that either people don't pay you super at all, which is dodgy, or they'll say to you, I'm going to pay your super to you directly. But that's not legal because then it's not super. It's just money that you get. In order for it to be superannuation, it needs to be an amount of money paid into your nominated super fund. You can use your invoice to give instructions on how much super you're entitled to and where you would like it to be paid. What I would suggest, though, So Creative Plus Business hires a lot of contractors, and when you're engaged by us, we will give you a form to fill out as soon as you start working for us that will ask you all of the necessary questions about your super details so that we can pay you. If someone isn't giving you a form like that when they engage you as a sole trader, then there is a good possibility that they either don't know that they're supposed to pay your super or they don't think they have to, which means you probably have a little bit of argy-bargy in your future, I'm afraid. I wish it was different, but unfortunately that's the case at the moment.
Thanks for that, Monica. There are a few more questions from this section. Do you recommend paying yourself a wage from the business income account? This is Ali talking about the separation of those accounts.
Yeah, hi, Ali. I do think that's a good idea, but you'll still be navigating the famine and the feast, and that actually doesn't change. So even though I am an employee of my own company and I do pay myself a wage, sometimes I pay myself more and sometimes I pay myself less just because I am still navigating the famine and the feast even now. It's a good habit to get into if the majority of your money is coming in through your ABN, to put all of that into your business account and then figure out how much you can pay yourself from that account. As a sole trader, you don't have to do that for any kind of legal or financial reason, but it does set you up for fantastic habits. As the business grows and as those amounts of money get bigger, which will happen, you've set up a gorgeous habit there where you are financially providing for your business first and then figuring out how much money you can pay yourself. It isn't technically speaking a wage if you're a sole trader, but it does provide the same, level of comfort, I suppose. So it's a good habit to get into.
Another question from Elle is, can your ABN income be linked to the ATO through MyGov the way employee income is linked?
Not currently. That isn't the case. I know that there is a lot of will to make that happen, but unfortunately, because of the different ways in which we make money, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, for the ATO to be able to take that on. I mean, to give you an understanding of how gigantic this is, the superannuation guarantee was launched in 1992, and the ATO only took over superannuation about 4 years ago. So it's a gigantic amount of money and a gigantic problem. I think it's problematic because I think there's a lot of underhanded stuff going on, which isn't being seen. But if you think about the 3 ways that I mentioned that you can make money through your ABN, invoicing, taking payments from people in real life, and e-commerce, I mean, even just navigating that for your own circumstances all through your ABN it's trickier than if you're an employee. So no is the answer at the moment. I hope that changes one day.
We have a question from Jess and Mike.
Hi,
Do
Jess.
you recommend getting lump sum payments or incremental or weekly payments for your services? I'm imagining from an entity that is contracting you.
It really does depend on the nature of the work. So I can't really answer that question without knowing more about how you work. And it isn't also just about you and your cash flow. It's also about the client and their cash flow. I do think it's worthwhile having a conversation with the client at the beginning. If you're talking about smaller amounts of money, then usually we get paid those smaller amounts of money once the work has been completed. But certainly for larger projects or for ongoing relationships, you could coordinate a monthly payment or a retainer, or perhaps you could divide up your payments into chunks. So when I was working primarily as a film producer, I would get paid in chunks. So like a chunk of money at the beginning once things got started, and then another chunk of money at the beginning of production, and then another chunk at the beginning of pre-production, and then another chunk of money at delivery. The film process lends itself to that sort of chunking, and then it was my job just to ensure that I was managing the cash flow within that. So it's a fantastic question that I've given you a very vague answer to. I apologise, but hopefully that's helpful.
We do have another question from Elle, who asks, do you report a wage that you pay yourself differently in your tax returns if you're a sole trader just moving money between your personal accounts, or is it just reported as income regardless of how money is moved around in your end?
Yes, the second option. So when you're a sole trader, you don't have to report the money moving around within your own accounts. One of the features of being a sole trader is that all of your money, whether you got it through your ABN or your tax file number, is lumped together, and your tax responsibilities are based on the whole lot. So from the ATO's perspective, they don't really care what you do with it once it's gone into your bank account. It all gets classified as gross assessable income. From that, you can then remove deductions and things like that. How you navigate it in your own bank account is really just up to you and how you want to learn more about your financial management and what works best for you. But no, you don't have to report any of that.
And I've just got a couple of questions that are sort of hangovers from the last one about business types. So Marissa Bell asks, when do you need to register as a proprietary limited company, PTY?
That's a really, really good question. And again, I'm going to have to give you a vague answer. It's very much dependent on circumstances. So there might be legal reasons why you want to do that. There could be tax or financial reasons why you want to do that. Sometimes people need to register a company because they're having more dealings with overseas entities, and being a proprietary limited company does make that a little bit easier. I became a proprietary limited company, back in the dark ages, because I wanted to cover myself with workers' compensation insurance, which is only possible if you are an employee of a company. There are lots of different reasons for it. You'll know that it's time, in a way, when it's costing you to not be a proprietary limited company. And by that I mean, again, back in the dark ages when I was a sole trader, I started losing jobs because I wasn't a company, and that was a wake-up call. But before you make the decision, I would make a couple of recommendations. Talk to an accountant if you have one, and if you can, talk to a business advisor or a mentor as well about what those implications might be. If you can afford it, a lawyer is a good idea too, but each of those different bits of support will give you a different perspective. I will reassure you though, setting up a company is much cheaper and easier than it used to be. So if you do set up a company and you think you've made a terrible mistake, it's not the end of the world, and you can close that company down relatively easily.
And then there are a couple of questions about registering that business name.
Yep.
Margaret asks, she has an ABN in her own name. Does she need to register a business?
Well, she has registered a business because she's got an ABN. She's registered the business of herself. If she wants to use a name that's different from her own name, then she will have to register that as a business name using the same ABN.
And this is the same. Another question from Elle is is this the same for registering as a non-profit? You need to register the name.
Yes. Generally speaking, I would urge you to go through that registration process, because it's also preventative. It means that somebody else can't get the name that you're currently using, which is one of the key reasons why it's worth spending that $44 to do so.
Mel asks, can you have more than one structure, i.e. a sole trader and a social enterprise?
Social enterprise is a tricky one because it isn't a legally recognised entity in Australia at the moment. It's a bit like a collective. There is a certification process that you can go through, however, and usually a social enterprise is more likely to be a proprietary limited company or a not-for-profit. But to answer the question, yes, you can be more than one type of legal entity. You can have more than one ABN. You can have as many different business names as you like under one ABN, but if you want to be different structures, then that's okay. You just have to have a good reason for it. Let me give you an example that illustrates that. So I provide mentoring, advice and support for a ceramics partnership. They are a company. There are 3 of them in their ceramics studio, and they have an ABN for the ceramics studio, and everything that they do for their studio goes through that ABN. But each of the 3 people in that partnership also have their own ABNs, so they can go and do work as sole traders if they want to. Now, their partnership agreement states that if it's got anything to do with ceramics, it goes through the studio. but they've also got other practices. One of them is a textiles artist, and one of them also makes films. So if they're doing anything that's not clay, they do it with their own sole trader ABNs. And if they're doing something with clay, then it has to come into the company. It probably seems a little bit convoluted, but it's working really, really well for them. They've just made some really good rules around how they want to navigate that world, and it's working.
Brilliant. And just 2 more questions. Namalka asks, do actors and other professionals like screenplay writers use an ABN or a tax file number?
It's a really good question, and unfortunately the answer is both, because it depends on how they're hired. So in those situations, particularly with actors, they will very often be hired as employees. That's largely for legal and insurance reasons. But I think if you have both numbers available, then you can be hired either way. So, for example, in the corporate screen sector, where a lot of people work, you're much more likely to get hired under your ABN as a sole trader, whether you're an actor or a writer or a whatever. So, yeah, it really does depend on the nature of the circumstance and who the clients are. My recommendation is if you've got both numbers and you know what they mean, then you give as much choice as possible to whoever it is that wants to engage you professionally. Makes the whole process easier.
And then the last question from Catherine. I have an income from a regular contract as a sole trader, but I'm wondering if I make income from the markets, can that be labelled as my hobby?
The hobby question is a really interesting one, and unfortunately I can't answer it right now, but I do recommend that you go and have a look at my tax webinar, because that's one of the most burning questions that people have about this topic, and we devote a lot of time and attention to it in that webinar. So I think that was this one that I mentioned. The recording is there. It's available for you. You can get the link from the Dropbox, and that will go some way to answering that question in broad terms. How it applies to you in particular, though, I can't answer that question. But if you go back to that webinar, you can have a look and at least get a head start on whether or not you are a hobbyist in that instance.
Thanks,
Fantastic.
Monica.
Oh, my God, great questions. Loving it. I'm going to have to motor through these next few tips, though, because we are going to, unfortunately, run out of time. So let me just have a little quick detour into the very boring world of insurance. I don't want to spend too much time here, but again, this is one of those stumbling blocks that I've mentioned before. I think it's important, actually, pretty much everything that I've talked about is how to be safe and sound in your professional decisions, and this is one of them. The main thing I want to talk about when it comes to insurance is the language, because if you don't understand the language, then it makes it much more difficult for you to be able to make the right kinds of decisions about insurance. The 2 main terms that I want to talk about are liability and duty of care. So when someone's talking about liability, it means that it's your legal responsibility, duty, or obligation to compensate someone or a person for any unintentional harm that you've caused by breaching your legal duty of care to that person. I'll talk more about legal duty of care in a moment. The easiest way to remember liability simply means legal responsibility. So if you are deemed to have a legal responsibility for somebody else and you do the wrong thing by accident, then you're going to be liable for any negative consequences as a result of that harm that you've caused. Insurance will help you to pay for the consequences of that unintentional harm. But this is the most important thing. When you're entering into a professional relationship with somebody else, or with a funding body, or with a collective, or whomever it might be, make sure you clearly establish the duty of care. This means that the law requires you to take reasonable care to avoid hurting or damaging a person or their property when your actions or inaction are likely to affect them. This duty of care question is really important, and it again is one of those reasons why the number that you choose is so important. If you choose to work under your tax file number, then you will have almost no duty of care as a result of that professional circumstance. You will not be expected to be liable for any of the things that are going to happen in that professional circumstance. Your employer usually has the duty of care. If you're a sole trader, on the other hand, and you've been hired to do work, you can be held liable for any unintentional harm that you've caused, and you might be considered to be the person that has the duty of care position. So when you're asking yourself, what kinds of insurances might I need? This is really how you answer that question. What's the legal duty of care that I'm expected to have in this relationship? And what am I liable for? What am I legally responsible for as a result? Now, these are really vague questions sometimes, so that's why having a contract is so important, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Essentially, what we're asking here is, what is the risk that you're about to undertake, and can insurance pay for any negative consequences as a result of that risk? Again, I get asked this question all the time. What kinds of insurance should I have? How much, etc.? That's how I always answer the question. What's the degree of risk that you're going to be undertaking? What's the duty of care responsibility that you're supposed to have? And what is the liability that you might be facing if you unintentionally cause harm to somebody else? Complicated questions, which I cannot give you the answers to right now. Obviously, it's dependent on your specific circumstances, but I do want to just go through the main types of insurance that you might need and give you a little bit of information about each one so that you'll know where to go for more information. The most common kind is public liability insurance. This is an insurance policy that will pay out money if your actions negatively harm or impact a member of the general public as a result of the work that you're doing. So this isn't insurance that protects your staff or your employees or your volunteers. It protects members of the general public who might be hurt as a result of you doing your job. It is very likely that you will need to have public liability insurance if you're doing anything public facing, like, putting on an event or filming in public or something like that. And there are options for relatively inexpensive public liability insurance that you can have a look at in the Dropbox. But that's the main thing to remember, the word public. Members of the public, not people who are intimately involved in the project, but members of the public who might be negatively impacted by what you're doing. Professional indemnity insurance is less likely to be needed, but I just want to quickly mention what it is, because this is an insurance policy that will pay out money if your advice or your recommendations have been incorrect or harmful. Now, the kinds of people who usually need professional indemnity insurance are people like, doctors and lawyers and, people who give advice for a living. It may not be necessary for you in your creative practice, but increasingly I'm seeing more and more creatives who provide consulting services are required to have professional indemnity insurance. Because if you are giving advice or recommendations as part of the consulting nature of your work, then if someone takes that advice and something negative happens to them, you could be liable for the expenses that are incurred. That's what professional indemnity insurance is for. And again, I would urge you to go and do a bit more research to find out whether or not you need it. Property and equipment insurance is relatively straightforward. If you've got stuff and you need to protect your stuff, then you can take out insurance policies for that stuff. And the last one that I want to quickly mention is workers' compensation insurance. Now, again, this is where those two numbers come back to haunt us again. If you are working under your tax file number, whether that's full-time, part-time or casual, you are by law covered by workers' compensation insurance. Your employer must protect you with this insurance, which will pay if you experience any unintentional harm as a result of doing your job. If you are working as a sole trader or in a partnership structure, there is no legal requirement for your client to protect you with workers' compensation insurance. They can choose to, but they don't have to. So if you're working under your tax file number, you are going to be protected by workers' comp. And if you are working under your ABN, there's a very good possibility that you're not. Again, if you are going to be experiencing risk as a result of being hired under your ABN, then you might need to have a think about how you're going to ensure that you are safe, given that you won't be entitled to this pretty standard form of insurance that all employees are automatically covered by. I've covered that really quickly and I haven't done it justice, but I'm worried about time. So Beck, were there any insurance questions?
No, so we can probably go straight to the next section.
Great. I'm going to make this one really quick because in a couple of weeks, I think, you're going to be doing have the opportunity to do a much bigger deep dive into how to make your professional dealings legal, or as it says here, how to be even more safe and sound. So there are a lot more episodes of these webinars coming up, which is super exciting. And episodes 3 and 4 are all about understanding arts contracts and how you can be contracted as a creative worker, and also copyright. Beck, are they being run by someone from Arts Law? That was just asking you a question there without giving you any chance to prepare. I'm sorry.
We are working with an internal lawyer with us, Sally Hanson, who has worked with Arts Law and has worked with a lot of different arts and culture law specialists.
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. Because of that, I'm going to be real speedy because Sally will be able to go into a huge amount more detail than I can. What I just want to quickly mention is contracts, because some of you might need that information. So a contract is a legally enforceable exchange of promises. And it's important when you're embarking on any kind of relationship where money is going to change hands, risk is going to be encountered, that you have some way of understanding what everybody's promising everybody else. A contract or a memorandum of understanding or an agreement, they're all the same thing, is one of the simple ways that you can do that. So some of the contract inclusions that you might want to consider are on screen. And for those of you who have the capacity to do so, I recommend taking a quick screenshot so that you can actually have this. But let me read them out for you. If I was engaging in a contract with someone else, regardless of what kind of professional work it was for my creative endeavours, I'd want the following. I'd want a really clear understanding of the scope of that work, the who, what, where, when, how, and why of the work in detail, so that we can have a really good opportunity to break that all down and work out what everybody's responsible for. You'd want to make sure that you've got a clear understanding of the schedules and deadlines. What's the timeline for delivery? What are the key milestones and when does this thing have to be finished? You might want to understand what the reporting requirements are. Do you have to report on your progress and to whom, when? Is there going to be some sort of an acquittal report, for example, or some sort of timeline reporting? Of course, you want to find out how much you're going to be paid and when, and what the process for payment is, so you've got a clear understanding of that in advance. I have very quickly danced over the topics of insurance and superannuation, but they are tricky. So make sure that those topics are addressed in a contract. Who has the duty of care? And are you an employee or an independent contractor? What does that mean for you? Something called a pause clause is worth thinking about, which is what happens if a client fails to send you the information that you need to do the work. Are you going to pause, and for how long? Clients and customers always like to make changes. So how many revisions or alterations can the client have for the amount of money that you've been contracted for, and what happens if they go over? Someone needs to be responsible for something called content errors and omissions. So who is responsible for providing the material needed to do the work, and who is responsible if that material is wrong or inaccurate? Who owns the copyright of the finished thing? And I'm delighted that Sally's going to spend a whole session on that. How can it be used, and what are the marketing rights for the maker? And finally, when does this job finish? What are the terms of this contract, and how can you terminate the contract before that point? Because believe it or not, you might sometimes want to get out of a contract before you've actually completed the work. These are my golden rules. The first golden rule is negotiate. Every contract can be negotiated before it's been agreed upon, before it's been signed, or before anything's been finished up. And so make sure that you understand what your rights and responsibilities are, so you can negotiate the best position for yourself in the most empathetic way possible. And always make sure that you get advice, particularly legal advice, if you don't understand what's happening. No one is going to expect you to understand what's happening, but sometimes people will exploit that lack of knowledge. So my recommendation is to go to Arts Law. I've mentioned them in passing already, the Arts Law Centre of Australia. They are our one-stop shop for legal advice and resources and support, and I highly recommend that you go and check them out if you can. Now, I've still got a little bit to go, but I'll just stop there for a second and see if we've got any speedy questions.
We don't currently.
Oh, great. Well, then let's...
What I can see.
Amazing. Let's quickly talk about marketing. This is my last step. Now, I could obviously do a whole session on marketing, but my tip here is to be prepared for a bit of marketing and to think about your professional work in terms of relationships, not transactions. So what I want to do is just talk about what marketing is from a traditional point of view, and then we can discuss how it's different for creative practitioners. From a traditional point of view, marketing is any activity that connects buyers with products and services. And it comes from this term, the market, which you can see here on the screen. I think that for creatives, marketing is quite different. For us, marketing is super personal. It's about being unique, and it's any activity that connects what you have to offer with a range of people who might have money or opportunity or both for you. So in other words, if we think about our marketing and self-promotion purely in terms of ensuring that a financial transaction happens, then it's going to be a cynical and unhappy process. What I'm suggesting is to think about your marketing not in terms of selling, but in terms of building relationships. How can you promote yourself and your work? How can you utilize digital marketing, social media, your own website, networking events, or whatever else it is to build relationships? In my experience, working in the creative sector is all about these relationships, playing the long game. The person that you meet today might still be someone that you have a professional relationship with in 10, 20, 30 years. It's a small industry and we all know each other. So thinking about it from that point of view can make this a little bit easier, which means all of your marketing and promotional activity needs to be centered on this idea of trust. How can you use marketing to encourage other people to trust you? Because I think that is the foundational element of any healthy relationship. If you approach your marketing in a panic, if you apply desperation to the process, if your marketing activities are chaotic or sporadic, if you only ever focus on marketing because you're unemployed, then you're not really going to be presenting a trustworthy picture to the rest of the world, which means that regardless of what tactics you choose, I'm going to ask you to think about the strategy. What is it that you would like to achieve from your marketing activities? What does success look like for you when you think about marketing? And once you've started thinking about your strategic approach, then you can think about all the different elements that might go into that, which include, as it says here on screen, things like your website, networking opportunities, asking people for recommendations and word of mouth, creating professional friendships and alliances with people who are in a similar field to you, using social media, including LinkedIn, utilizing online directories, and my favorite, a strategic coffee. I love a strategic coffee. It's my favorite way of building and maintaining relationships. I spend lots of my time doing that, and it's a very simple way to stay in mind. I know I'm only covering this really quickly, which is why there's more resources for you in the Dropbox, including this one-page marketing plan that we have created specifically for creative professionals. And you can see it asks you a lot of questions about all the different kinds of aspects of your marketing strategy that you might want to look at. So you can just take a minute, make yourself a cup of tea and start thinking about some of these things. I probably went too fast for there to be any questions, Beck, but are there any? Don't know.
Did get a question, but only to ask for the Dropbox, which I have posted. So that's been posted into the comments. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I've just got one last thing that I'd like to share with you, my final tip, and that is hang in there. You might feel that you're on a bit of a scary roller coaster, and that's because you are. As frequently mentioned in this presentation, when you decide to embark on a creative career, you've also decided to invite chaos into your life. Slight language warning, but we had this image commissioned by an artist called Lenny Pelling to help us to describe this creative process, roller coaster of emotions. This diagram or this drawing is in the Dropbox if you want to download it and have it available for you. And I think that, you know, this roller coaster from, you know, this feels awesome to this is tricky, and the pit in the middle there, and then climbing yourself back out of it, there's a pretty constant experience. In fact, you might have experienced it just in the 90 minutes of this webinar. So I'd like you to hang on to that just to remind yourself that not only is the roller coaster real, but it might be part of the reason why you picked this life in the first place, and you are not alone on the crazy chaos of your creative business. Trust me, there's lots of us out there. I'm sure there's other questions, Beck, but just to wrap up, I wanted to share the link again to the Dropbox. It's on screen, and there's the QR code. And also to remind you all that there are 5 more of these webinars coming up. You can see them on screen there. And Beck, I might hand back over to you.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was epic. And epic. We're getting a lot of beautiful thank yous in the meeting chat from people on the call. Also, some love for the earrings that you're wearing.
Oh, these are from a wonderful artist called Jeff McCann, by the way. If you want to go and check out Jeff's cardboard jewelry, just a little plug.
But lots of positive comments about the clarity of this beautiful presentation, and obviously a lot to cram in. And so thank you everyone for being online. Obviously we've recorded this, and the good news is we can keep it on our website, which is great, and it's going to be uploaded along with obviously the Dropbox information that you've got. So do take the opportunity to dive into that material that Monica has so carefully curated. Obviously, we've got a lot more of these coming up. We will invite you to it, and we'll also send you some a little survey just to find out some things about the other kinds of interests that you might have, other issues that are burning for you at the moment, whether the timing is working for this, is it good to have it on a Monday night, those sorts of things. So we're really keen to hear from you. Thank you once again for Monica and Creative Plus Business for being so epic and excellent.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Thanks you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.